And we are back. Welcome back in to the Pigskin Cafe. Thanks for joining in. Thanks for listening. We're going to be breaking down a very important topic in this episode. Last week, I talked about my college football coaching hot seats, and number one on this list was Bryan Harsin. And man, in less than a week of releasing that video, he's relieved of his duties at the University of Auburn. Hampton, I'm so glad that you've joined me tonight. And I just want you to know that my opinion is the one that mattered to Auburn, because if Graham didn't call for Bryan Harsin to be fired on YouTube from the Pigskin Cafe, it wouldn't happen. So,
True.
in the comments, if you're listening, comment what team needs to fire their coach next. That could be the comment, the question of the day.
Who else needs to lose their job?
And Graham will speak it into existence, and it'll be done. So, Hampton, I'm glad you joined me for this one. We're just going to break down what happened at Auburn because, I mean, to say it's a tragedy is kind of accurate. I think it is. Auburn, I think it is a tragedy for the fact that Auburn fires a head coach and Gus Malzahn who did a pretty good job there. He exceeded some expectations, but they always seem to play to their opponents, whether they're playing Alabama or Jacksonville State, whether they're playing Georgia or Mississippi State, whether they're playing Vanderbilt or Tennessee, they're going to play to their opponents. And that was kind of the downfall of Gus Malzahn's tenure at Auburn, is that, yeah, they did play Alabama really close, and they beat Alabama several times, Georgia as well. But then there were also games where Auburn fans were pulling their hair out at that noon kickoff when they're playing a scrub team. And it just seemed to be that was the downfall. So Auburn fires him. Bryan Harsin is hired from Boise State. And if you're a very long listener of the Pigskin Cafe, we did talk about that years ago. And what we had to say was, if I can remember, was that Bryan Harsin is not a bad football coach, but he's very much one of those that he's a program builder. He's trying to get a team that is 6-6, 5-7. How are we going to get to 9-3, 8-4 consistently? And that's what Bryan Harsin brought to Auburn, and that's not what Auburn fans wanted. So it was like it was
a bad marriage.
It was I was going to relate it to marriage, but I was going to say it was not a marriage made in heaven. It was a bad marriage. So Hampton, man, I want you to just break it down, take us through what Auburn was thinking, and why was this week after a bad loss to Arkansas, why was now the right time for Auburn to fire Bryan Harsin?
Well, the short answer for why now was the right time is they hired their AD and John Cohen from Mississippi State. That was ultimately the reason that the decision was made right now. And also, they came off a bye week and looked awful against Arkansas. I mean, I didn't think they played particularly hard. They had guys refusing to go into the game because they didn't want to affect their red shirt for future years. So I think that was why the time was now for Auburn. Everybody knew even before the year, unless he went 10-2 or 11-1, he was not coming back to Auburn. The coup worked. It did not work in the short-term manner that the boosters wanted, but ultimately it crippled the program and crippled Bryan Harsin, where it was just like a slow death is what it was. I mean, we were marching toward the graveyard and everybody knew that it was coming. And what I find very interesting about this whole situation is, you fire Gus Malzahn, and I'm like, as an Alabama fan, I would kid about Gus Malzahn a lot. I thought his offense was very often high school at times, especially in the passing game. Now, in the running game, I think it was very well schemed at times, especially if he had the right players running it. But offensively, he didn't develop quarterbacks well. They didn't have a college passing scheme. You were either running a go, a vert, or not a go, vert, a go, a dig, or a curl. I mean, that was pretty much the offense. And I get that whole perspective. But one thing I will say about Gus Malzahn, every year at Auburn, his teams got better as the year went along. And most of the
Hmm.
time, by the end of the year, they were playing their best ball. And you get rid of him, which I understand the reasons why. But like you mentioned, he beat Nick Saban 3 times. He beat
Yeah.
him in 13, he beat him in 17, he beat him in 19. How many other coaches can say that? I mean, and whether you like it or not, I know Auburn fans often say, our goal is championships. And that's a great goal to have. And I get that. But mainly, you earn your worth by beating Alabama. If we beat Alabama, most of the time it's a good year at Auburn. And that is true. I've heard Auburn fans say that. You can tell by the way they celebrate after beating Alabama. And Gus Malzahn did that. Okay. You didn't like Bo Nix as your quarterback. So you kind of ran him off, and Bryan Harsin could never really connect with him. Well, now he's at Oregon, and he's a Heisman candidate and playing out of his mind right now. And Gus Malzahn is at UCF. They're a top 25 team playing really good football for the most part.
Yeah.
And the cautionary tale is the grass isn't always greener. They fired Gus Malzahn with the intent to hire Kevin Steele. And then that didn't work. The boosters didn't really get their way. And then it was, Alan Green is going to come in and he's going to make his hire. And he's going to have full autonomy and make his hire. And, you heard the usual suspects, Lane Kiffin, Mario Cristobal, Hugh Freeze. They
Steve
were going to
Sarkisian.
Steve Sarkisian. Yep, I forgot about that. Great point.
Yeah.
They were going to be the next Auburn head coach. And ultimately, what happened? None of those guys came close to being the Auburn coach. And they hired Bryan Harsin, and it was labeled, he was our number one pick the whole time. And that was just ultimately not true. And you were selling your fans a bill of goods that were out of date and that had already expired because that was just a complete falsehood. And the reality was, I know Auburn fans got excited about the hire, thought he stood for the right things. He could be a Saban-like guy with the discipline, accountability that he could bring to the program. Fact of the matter, Boise State, he inherited a gold mine from Chris Peterson, right? Inherited a gold mine from him. And there was a guy after Chris Peterson who did a really good job, and he inherited a really good program. And they did well, but I think the program dipped a little bit with Bryan Harsin at the helm instead of being elevated. So then he comes to Auburn, and I hear all these good things about, he's going to recruit well. He never recruited well. Never, not even in his first year. Then the allegations happened with I'm not going to get into what all he was accused of because I think the boosters and the people at Auburn that started that did him a real disservice. And, that whole thing happened. That crippled him even further. And then as an on-field coach, he couldn't make halftime adjustments. I mean, how many first half leads did he blow? I mean, probably over half of his games, he had a first half lead and he blew it in the second half. And that comes down to coaching. And, Auburn, the most talented team that he was going to have at Auburn was last year, and they went 6-6 in the regular season, I believe. And two things can be true. Bryan Harsin was in over his head. He was not the right man for the job when they hired him, like I predicted he would. And we predicted before the year with Coach Hayes, me and Chase did. I said he was my coach to watch for in the hot seat, and then you said it last week. So we were aligned on that. So that can be true that they did him dirt or that he was in over his head. But Auburn also did not handle the situation well at all, from the allegations that were thrown against him, not being in full support of what he wanted to do in the athletic department and that football program. And when you're not completely aligned, I mean, it's like tug of war. You got one person pulling this way, one person pulling this way, and then ultimately no progress is made. And I think Auburn made the right move by firing him. What's going to be interesting is you're hearing the same things about John Cohen is going to have full autonomy to make this hire. They've got an NIL war chest built up. They've got training or training facilities that are in the works that are going to put them at the top of the mountain, and they're, top 10 job in the country. We've heard all this before. until I see you go out and give him the actual autonomy to go get his guy, I'm not gonna believe it. And also, I don't agree that Auburn is a top 10 job in the country. I think they're a very good job. I don't think they're a top 10 job. And I know that angers a lot of Auburn fans, but other than Mama G's and having a very nice campus, and you got a good tradition with pageantry and good players and Heisman's, but you don't have a very winning tradition at Auburn. I mean, you've won 2 national championships in your program's history. So I think all that needs to be kept in mind, to temper expectations and let the process play out. That's kind of how I feel about the situation. Graham, I'll kick it to you. I know it went on a little bit on that, but there's a lot to say about this saga on the plains.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, Hampton. The biggest thing to me, and just to emphasize that a little bit more, um, was that Auburn never really invested in Bryan Harsin outside of his contract. There
Mm-hmm.
was never buy-in from the athletic department, from the scouting department, from the recruiting department, from administrators to the board of directors. Um, all the way down to fan base, there wasn't full buy-in, and he was never given full support and the opportunity to make something out of what he was given. Um, I felt like Auburn, and we talked about it in their coaching search, is that Auburn was trying to find the best guy that they could, but also still maintain some of their control from the administration side. Um, and that was kind of, to me, their downfall, was that they weren't willing to put all their money into Bryan Harsin, all the investment into Bryan Harsin. Let's see what he can do, and after a few years, then we'll reevaluate and say, okay, our investment was not worth it, or it was worth it. They were trying to have their cake and eat it too, and that is not a possibility. And that's a long time saying, and it's never come true. You can't have both things at the same time. Um, so I think it really uh, is just unfortunate how the whole situation played out. Um, Auburn Auburn has a great tradition of football. They have some of the most electric fans in college football. There's
Mm-hmm.
no denying their fan base is one of the
Very
tops in
loyal,
the
very
country.
loyal
Yeah,
fan base.
yeah.
Absolutely.
We could argue that they have a top 10 fan base, and I would probably
Agreed.
support that.
I would.
But Hampton, I do agree. This is probably not a top 10 job right now. It could be. They have the potential to be a top 10 job, but they have a lot of things working against them. Like I mentioned in the pod uh, by myself, they play Georgia every year. They play Alabama every
Mm-hmm.
single year. And so that's really tough, because those are two of the elite teams in college football. And you could make the argument they're the two most elite teams in college football over the past several years. So you're bringing somebody that not only has to beat one of them every year, you have to beat both of them every year, um, to really give yourself a shot in the national title. And so I think Auburn has kind of given themselves expectations that they couldn't reach. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the defining factor of the Bryan Harsin tenure, is they wanted from day one to be a national championship team, and they weren't willing to give them national championship resources to get there. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's what it comes down to, is simply that. So um, it'll be interesting to see who's interested in the job,
Mm-hmm.
because, like I said, it could be, it has the potential to be, but it's going to take some work to get there. And I hope that the Auburn administration and the new AD realizes that and is willing to
Mm-hmm.
see this hire as that. Go ahead,
Mm-hmm.
Hampton.
And I will say this, Harson did himself no favors, like I mentioned, with the recruiting being so lackluster. I mean, there were reports that high school coaches around the state had never even met him. Like, he had
Yeah.
never established relationships. He wasn't a big proponent of NIL,
Mhm.
which in
Yeah.
college football in this day and time you have to be. What were
Yeah.
you
I
going to?
read that there was one booster event. I think it might have been a Bo Jackson golf tournament or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
that he chose not to go to hire it might have been a defense coordinator or something like that, to hire. So
Mm-hmm.
he was working to hire somebody, which is
Not a
understandable, to
good
hire
move.
somebody, but literally, I'm just asking for a couple hours of your time, and it means a lot to the program, and he wasn't
Mm-hmm.
willing to do that.
Yeah. And I mean, so he did himself no favors, but like you said, they didn't fully support him in every way they could. I mean, there were
Yeah.
people from that were never happy with the hire.
Mhm.
and he was set up to fail. I mean, that is just facts. He was set up to fail, but also he was in over his head. Both
Yeah.
two things can coexist. I want to clarify what I meant by Auburn, and to add on to what you're talking about, expectations. When you make this hire a guy who you tell him you build your program the way you want it to be and aspire to be a championship program, but don't put that on him right away. Like, give him time, give him resources that he needs, and let the chips fall where they may.
Yeah.
Because putting all this added pressure of we got to be a championship school, obviously you need to have goals of that. If you're not, then what are you doing, and why are you coaching football? But Auburn historically has not been a program that competes for a championship year in, year out. So instead of chasing that, find the right guy, the right fit for your program, and let him build it his way. And then you can talk about championships when the foundation is strong. You know, I think that needs to be their approach. And kind of with that, I think we can transition real quick before we get out of here. Graham, who do you think is a realistic hire that would be a good fit at Auburn?
Yeah, I think that they're gonna throw around a lot of names, and I think that there's a lot of people that would be interested in the job, but I don't think Lane Kiffin leaves Ole Miss to go to Auburn. I think that Deion Sanders might be interested in Auburn if there's no other alternatives. But to me, he might be interested in a place like Georgia Tech more, where the leash is a whole lot longer and he's in downtown Atlanta. But this is kind of a name that I've heard a little bit, but I think it's a good pairing. It's Todd Monken, the offensive coordinator from Georgia. We've seen over the past 2 years that their offense has really adapted. It has gone from a run heavy team to now a pass heavy team, and
Mm-hmm.
getting the most out of the players that they have. He's been with Kirby Smart, has been an offense coordinator in the NFL, has been a head coach in college football, and so I think that he would be a good fit. You pair him with, Dell McGee. I think that's his name. You put him as the offensive coordinator, bring in Cadillac Williams, keep him there as the running back coach, and build a staff that can recruit and coach in the Southeastern Conference. I think that is something that Auburn didn't do with Bryan Harsin. He never worked in the South, truly.
Never.
Um, and so I think, that would be a good investment is somebody that has been in the South, has knows what it takes to win and to get there, and a resume that can succeed. So I would probably go with Todd Monken. Reasonable. You look at other candidates, like Matt Rule, guys like that. I think that Matt Rule might just take a year off. He's getting paid way too much money to just jump into the first job that's offered
Mm-hmm.
to him. So yeah, I would probably go with Todd Monken. I would say that he was a sort of under the radar candidate that would do a
Mm-hmm.
really good job at Auburn.
Well, I can tell you right now, if they hire Todd Monken, there are going to be many upset folks on the plains. They're not going to be happy with that. They're not going to be happy if they get a guy like Jeff Grimes from Baylor, the offensive coordinator. That name has been floated around a lot, which I think is very interesting. I mean, I don't know how I feel about that, hiring a first time head coach. If I'm Auburn, I know the name. I know Kiffin and Dion have been mentioned. I don't see Kiffin leaving like you. I don't. I could see Kiffin
Mhm.
honestly either staying at Ole Miss, or if he leaves, I think he could go pro. I really think he would like another shot to go coach in the pros and not have to recruit and really have to fool with that.
Mhm.
So that'll be an interesting thing to watch. I think Dion would do well there. I think he would do
Mhm.
well. He would recruit very well. I don't know how good of a fit he would be at Auburn. I think him and the boosters, I think, could clash a little bit because he's not a yes man. He's going to do things his way, which I respect about him, and which is what they should allow him to do.
Yeah.
I don't know if that marriage is going to work. Matt Rule, I think you make a good point about taking a year off, but he's a program builder. Look what he
Mhm.
did at Temple. Look how he turned around Baylor. I think he could do a really good job at Auburn. And it's not a sexy hire. It's not one that you're going to be like, oh man, they're going to 10 straight national championships or anything like that. But I think he could really turn that program around. I think he could recruit and develop very well, and ultimately be a very good head coach for them. So I think a guy like that would be good for Auburn. I know Hugh Freeze has been mentioned. I don't SEC. Are they going to let him back in? I don't know. That's going to be interesting. But I
Yeah,
think if he did come in, he'd do a really good job because
I know.
he's proven himself.
Yeah, there's no doubt that Hugh Freeze doing a really good job at Auburn. He just signed an extension, and I think he's making like $5 million a year.
Yeah. Hmm.
So that'd be a massive payout that Auburn would have to pay to Liberty to get
Hmm.
him, to get his
Be at least
services.
20
And
million, I think.
yeah, and
Along
as of
with
right
a new
now,
contract for him, and along with the other two buyouts that they're playing for Gus and now Harsin.
yeah, a lot of money, a lot of money.
Hmm. Absolutely. Well, got anything else to add, Graham, or you want to take us out of here, buddy?
No, we'll go ahead and close it out. Thanks for listening. If this is your first time, subscribe to the channel. Leave us a like, leave us a comment. We're glad that you joined us for this. Was supposed to be a quick one. I don't know how quick it ended up being. Just talking about Bryan Harsin's situation and what Auburn's going to do in the future. I think it's important to talk about, and it's honestly one of the funnest parts of uh, Auburn sports is who's going to be the next leader. It is a opportunity to really just give you hope, or
Hmm.
it could really let you down based off what happens. So, um, Hampton, you got anything else to say?
In the words of Shawshank Redemption, hope is a good thing.
Yeah, hope is a good thing. It gives you the opportunity to go into the off season and feel good about where you stand
Hmm.
next year. Which in today's age, it's important. You need all of your fans, all of your coaches, all of your players, all of your administration on the same page, trying for the same goal every year. And I think that would really help Auburn. So, hope you've enjoyed our conversation. Make sure you leave a like, leave a comment, as I said. Um, but as of now, we're going to wrap it up. So, the Pigskin Cafe will be closed for now. But until next time, chew on that.